Yo, it's the Latino Newsletter podcast. It's a show about us all the time. I'm your host, Julio Ricardo Varela. And for this inaugural season of this podcast, season 1, a special thanks to the generous support from the Latino Community Foundation. Learn more about the Latino Community Foundation at latinocf.org. All right, we're at episode 8, the Ocho. Yeah. And we're loving the vibe from our listeners and supporters, getting a lot of texts and interest and subscribers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And part of why we created this podcast is to explore this question. What is the state of Latino political power, especially now in 2024? The number of Latino eligible voters this cycle is an estimated 36.2 million. And that's according to Pew Research. And that's up from 32.3 million in 2020. And Pew notes that this represents 50% of the total growth in eligible voters during this time. So from 2020 to 2024, 50% of the total growth of all eligible voters in this country are Latino. Think about that. Will that translate to actual electoral and political representation power? So my next guest has a lot to say about it, and I'm super excited. This guest is flipping impressive. Frankie Miranda is the first openly gay president and CEO of the Hispanic Federation, the nation's premier Latino nonprofit membership organization. He took the helm of Hispanic Federation in December of 2019, shortly before COVID-19 was declared a national emergency. He continued to grow the organization's programming during the pandemic while providing over $33.5 million in COVID-related grants to more than 500 nonprofits in 41 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. And before he joined Hispanic Federation, Frankie held several senior leadership positions in the communications industry, including Director of Communications for the New York Univision TV stations. He also served as Deputy Press Secretary for Spanish language media for the Hillary Clinton U.S. Senate campaign in 2000 and Fernando Ferrer's New York City mayoral campaign in 2001. Frankie sits on the external Comcast Corporate DEI Advisory Council, and he's also a trustee of Fundación Banco Popular. He holds a BA in Political Science from the University of Puerto Rico and an MA in Performance Studies from New York University. And Frankie lives in Queens with his husband, Ricardo, and their cat, Valentina. Frankie, welcome to the Latino Newsletter podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. The good thing is that you're persistent and you made it happen.
If anything, my journalism chops told me to, a good journalist is persistent. I appreciate it. But listen, speaking about hard-hitting journalism, I have a really, really serious question for you. Talk to me about your cat, Valentina. What's Valentina's personality? How are you rolling with Valentina these days in 2024?
Well, Valentina is amazing. Valentina came to our lives. My husband gave me an ultimatum in 2017 and said, we're going to have a pet. My mom told me that I was allergic to cats. I said to him that, and he said, well, you're going to be taking anti-allergy medication for the rest of your life. And then I realized that as soon as Valentina came to our life, she's a rescue, and came into our life, I didn't sneeze once.
Oh, you
so
see?
That means that, or I got over my allergy, or my mother told me something that was inaccurate. But she has been part of our lives, and she's amazing. So I am a childless cat gay person.
So I didn't want to tee that up for you, but before we start, my son, who is in college, he's a soccer player, and one of his roommates has a cat, and he's going through sort of the allergy thing, but he loves the cat. Cat's named Tiger. And he's like, every day, it's like, my allergies are getting better because, I'm exposing myself to Tiger. And I'm like, all right, so Tiger and Valentina, great cats. But seriously, though, Frankie, share with me the state of Latino political power in 2024.
Well, This is an extraordinary question. And as an organization dedicated to do civic engagement, voter registration, get out the vote for a nonpartisan lens, I think that we are in a very exciting moment. We have been working on registering Latinos to vote, naturalizing Latinos, making sure that they are registered to vote, and educating them about the importance of going out and voting. But with all the possibility and the potential of the Latino vote, in which we are the road to the White House, we were getting into a slump, right? We were having a little bit of an issue on engaging people. And then suddenly when there was this big shakeup on the campaigns, and there is a new Democratic ticket running with a new Republican ticket, suddenly we have people that were telling us, people in our communities telling us, I don't want to talk to you right now.
Yeah.
I don't think that these people represent me. Now there is a renewed enthusiasm and interest in our community. And that has been so incredibly exciting for me and for all our team, because at the end of the day, we want to unleash this incredible potential, but we were running into this big problem of people basically saying, I don't think that I am interested in hearing from anyone because these candidates are not representing my interests, or I don't feel reflected into whatever is their platform. So I think that right now what we are seeing is an unleash of potentially groundbreaking historical power of the Latino vote for the presidential election.
You know, this is interesting because it kind of gets into part of why we created the Latino Newsletter, this notion of political power and the illusion. And it's interesting you talk about engagement, right? What are the biggest misperceptions about Latinos and Latinas and political engagement right now that we don't talk about enough?
Well, one of the things that people think that we want to hear over and over and over and over is issues related to the border and immigration. We just recently did a poll of Latino voters, and we found out that the top issues preoccupying our community are pocketbook issues. It's cost of living, inflation, jobs, the economy, housing costs. And that makes so much sense because our community was so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. These were the people that were allowing many of us to stay safe home, and they were the ones that were making sure that there was food on the shelves, that where crops were picked, that the meat packing industry was able to just continue operating, those that were delivering, and those were the most disproportionately affected, and those that have been struggling for a slower recovery because of the big impact. We know that many of our households lost at least one provider, breadwinner, that could have long-lasting effects on those families, especially those kids that can get into poverty. It will be very difficult to get them out of poverty. So this whole idea that we are all about that Latino voters just want to hear over and over about immigration issues, it is absolutely wrong. And the fact also that some people assume that Latino voters will vote in a very specific way, and they're not really talking culturally competent messaging to members of our community.
Right.
If you are talking to people in Florida, South Florida, people that have generational history or recent history fleeing political uncertainty in their countries and even violence in their countries. If you talk to those people, it will be very different to talk to a Boricua from the Bronx that have been here for 3-4 generations, or somebody in Texas or in California. So what we want to make sure is that while there are overarching issues that affect our community and they will resonate with our community, each of the messaging in different places needs to be catered, because again and again we hear that we're not a monolith. But people still continue just using, let's just wait 2 weeks before an election, have somebody say a few words in Spanish, and that will take care of it. And there has been a divestment and under-resourcing of civic engagement, especially nonpartisan civic engagement, dedicated to address the questions and the needs of our community. The campaigns need to do better. Everybody needs to do better when it comes to messaging to the Latino community.
There's so much you said there. And there's also this perception about these organizations that you all are in the bag for political parties. Like you work for Democrats, which I have challenged that for several years. I know a lot of the people that work in your organization. What do you say to that, Frankie? Like when you hear things like that?
Well, first of all, I want to double click on what you mentioned about funding and resources.
Okay.
A lot of attention has been paid on this election cycle on C4 and PAC organizations. And they continue to ignore the fact that for communities of color, for Latinos, it is highly effective to start the first engagement in a nonpartisan way. People of color will be better voters or more active voters if the engagement start in a nonpartisan way, in an education way, understanding their rights, understanding what is at stake, and then other organizations, other structures, the campaigns, the C4s, the PACs can take the message forward. But it's critically important the work that nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations are doing every single day. I have canvassers in North Carolina that people have showed them guns and people have spit on them. I have to work in Florida, and the organization, Hispanic Federation and Latino Justice Pro-Def, we have sued the state of Florida because they want to create barriers for organizations like ours to be able to do voter registration. We continue to see the challenges, like in Texas, where the Attorney General have created raids on volunteers, octogenarian volunteer, doing voter registration in a excessive show of force to intimidate communities that are doing the hard work, the volunteering work, sometimes with no resources. So we cannot underestimate the fight and the challenges that organizations like ours are so dedicated. Right now, we are putting from our own reserves $1 million to do these engagement between now and the election. And this is not counting a few other funders that have been generous to us, but it doesn't compare with the other resources and the challenges and how expensive it is. In which before we used to say, hey, just take that side of the parking lot. I'm going to be doing voter registration on this side. And we need to create even security protocols. So it is a very different scenario. And these organizations are so important for this democratic process and sometimes is overlooked.
In terms of then political parties, what do you think they're getting right and what do you think they're getting wrong? And you might have already addressed some of this, but just kind of give me sort of that. As you know, and then, you know, we're almost done and you can then go pet Valentina and hang out with Valentina after.
Well, I think that if we take, for example, the debate last week, right? One side is talking more of a entertainment spectacle show. And then the other side is trying to talk about rooted causes, some policy, what is really important to talk about, what are the traits of somebody that wishes to lead this country. It is very, very easy to dumb down messaging, right? And some people will react to that. Some of the, I heard a great analysis from another person saying that in Florida, what works for the Republican Party is just to say noun, verb, socialism, noun, verb, communism.
I know.
You don't need to really talk too much about...
Wait, can I just stay there with that? Because Every time I bring that up, people say, Julio, you're sitting here in your liberal Boston chair, which I'm not. But it's a very effective political message. And I've always said, you say that, you get 35% of Latinos in Florida, 40% just by saying that, right? I mean, so I didn't want to interrupt, but you got me riled up, Frankie.
Hey, absolutely. But then what I see that in the other side is that sometimes you want to become a policy expert and try to explain something, and sometimes you lose people, right? You lose people because you become like a policy wonk, and it's just sounded like rooted causes of blah, 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 blah. What we need to find is a balance, really listening to what voters want to hear. We see in our recent poll that we had a large number of Latinos, at least 1/3 of Latinos are saying that they want to hear more about policies from the campaigns. So we still have an incredible opportunity here to educate people about the electoral process, what these two campaigns are proposing. And the fact is that there is a movable block in our community in which they're basically saying, whoever talks to me, whoever knocks on my door and listens to me, that is the campaign or the candidate that is going to get my vote. So just thinking that Latinos are a monolithic, one-way block of voters is wrong. And what we want is that campaigns understand that they need to talk to our community, pay attention to our community, and we're going to do the other side of the work, which is like ensure that Latinos get to the polls in large numbers, and also sending the message to those that are still not eligible to register to vote and vote in the election, that they have an important role here in motivating those that are registered and can vote to go out and do it for the rest of those that cannot do it.
All right. So final question. My final question is almost like a fill in the blank. Success in 2024 for the work that you do when it comes to political engagement, civic engagement, democracy awareness is blank.
Record number of Latino, Latinas, and Latinas getting to the polls.
So out of the 36.2 million you want to see, what would be success? 60, 70%, 80%?
I don't want to speculate. I want to say to you that we want as close as 100% of eligible voters to get out and understand that this is probably the most important election in many generations.
Listen, Frankie, I appreciate you for being on. Thank you so much for being my guest on the Latino Newsletter podcast.
Thank you so much. Happy to come back anytime.
All right, there you go. To quote Casey Affleck in Good Will Hunting, my boy's wicked smart. That's Frankie Miranda. You can say what you want about nonprofit Latino organizations. Sometimes they get some undeserved crap and critique, but the work is the work, and I've seen that work in action, and Frankie has become such a great leader and spokesperson for the organization. He was a fabulous guest. Thank you again, Frankie. All right, the Latino Newsletter is produced and edited by me, Julio Ricardo Varela, and fellow Boricua, Joaquin Cotler. The mixing and sound design is also by Joaquin Cotler, and the music you hear is by Cast of Characters via Soundstripe. You can now donate to us at thelatinonewsletter.org and click on the Donate tab, and also here on Spotify in the show notes. And if you like what you heard, share and review this podcast. We're on Spotify, like we said. We're on Apple Podcasts, Audible, iHeartRadio, etc. You can tweet us at Lat Newsletter on the Twitter, on the X, and follow us on all other social media platforms at The Latino Newsletter. And if you want to send me an email saying you love the show or you hate my guts, Julio at thelatinonewsletter.org. I read them all. So, just be honest, be kind. I won't hold it against you. We'll be back next week with another show, with another great guest. Peace out, y'all.